The town was small enough that everyone seemed to know each other's business, yet big enough for people to quietly underestimate one another. In a narrow street lined with old trees and faded houses, there lived a girl who rarely drew attention to herself. She was not the loudest in class. She was not the one teachers praised every day. Most people described her as quiet, and then moved on without thinking much more about her. But inside her small home, in the corner of a slightly dim living room, stood an old upright piano. This wood was scratched. One of the keys had a tiny crack. The pedals made a soft squeak when pressed. It was not beautiful, but to her it was everything. Every afternoon, after finishing her schoolwork, she would sit on the worn bench and gently lift the piano lid. The sound of the first note always filled the room like a deep breath. Her fingers were not rushed. They moved carefully, like she was speaking to someone who truly listened. Music was the one place where she did not feel small. At school, there was a music teacher who believed in discipline and routine. He liked simple songs for beginners. Clean notes, easy melodies, nothing too dramatic. He often reminded students that they should walk before they try to run. The girl never argued with him. She respected him. She followed instructions. She played the exercises he gave her without complaint. But there were things she never showed him. Late at night, when the house grew quiet and the streetlights outside cast soft shadows through the window, she would open her music notebook and turn to pages no one else had seen. These were not simple tunes. These were powerful pieces filled with emotion. She had discovered them online, listened to recordings over and over, and slowly taught herself how to play them. It was not easy. Her fingers would slip. Sometimes she would press the wrong key and stop, frustrated. There were nights when her hands felt tired and her eyes burned from focusing too long. But she never gave up. She would start again, and again. No one in town knew how many hours she had spent like this. One day, an announcement was made at school. The community center was organizing a small talent evening. It was not a huge event, but in a town like this it felt important. Parents would attend. Teachers would sit in the front rows. A few respected musicians from nearby areas were invited as guests. Students were encouraged to participate. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Some talked about singing. Others wanted to perform dance routines. A few confident students immediately volunteered to play instruments. She stayed quiet. The music teacher looked around the room and then his eyes rested on her. "You should participate," he said in a calm voice. "You play well enough. Just keep it simple." The class turned to look at her. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise. She felt heat rise to her face. "I can give you a basic tune," the teacher continued. "Something short. Something safe." "Safe." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she replied. A few students whispered behind her. One of them let out a soft laugh. Not cruel but doubtful. As if to say, "This will be interesting." After class, the teacher handed her a sheet of music. It was exactly what he had described. A simple melody, clean and easy, the kind beginners often learn in their first year. "This will be perfect," he said. "No need to try anything complicated." She took the paper and thanked him. On the walk home, the paper felt heavier than it should have. The melody printed on it was not difficult for her. In fact, she could play it without even looking at the keys. But something inside her felt restless. At home, she placed the sheet on the piano stand and played it once. The notes floated gently through the room. It sounded pleasant, calm, predictable. Her mother paused in the kitchen to listen. "That's beautiful," she said with a warm smile. The girl smiled back, but her heart felt divided. Beautiful was not the word she wanted. That evening, she attended the first rehearsal at the community center. The stage was small but neatly arranged. Rows of folding chairs faced the piano placed in the center. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and dust. Other students were already practicing. A boy rehearsed a lively drum performance. Two girls practiced a duet. There was laughter and chatter everywhere. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano and adjusted the bench. Her hands felt slightly cold. She placed the simple sheet music in front of her and began to play. The melody flowed exactly as written. No mistakes, no hesitation. When she finished, there was polite clapping from a few people in the room. "That's nice," someone said casually. "Very sweet," another added. The organizer, a middle-aged man with glasses, smiled kindly. "It will fit perfectly between the dance and the choir performance," he said. "A calm little break. Calm little break." She nodded again. As she stepped away from the piano, she overheard two students whispering nearby. "It's just basic," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "But at least she won't mess up." The words were not loud. They were not meant to hurt, but they stayed with her. That night she could not sleep easily. She kept replaying the rehearsal in her mind. The polite smiles, the careful clapping, the soft voices calling her performance sweet and safe. She sat up in bed and looked toward the living room where the piano waited in the dark. Slowly, she walked over and switched on the small lamp beside it. The yellow light created a quiet, private world. She did not place the simple sheet on the stand this time. Instead, she opened her hidden notebook. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. Then she began. The first notes were soft but deeper than the simple tune. They carried weight, emotion. The melody built slowly, then grew stronger. Her hands moved faster. Her left hand added power while her right hand danced across higher notes. It was not perfect. She made a mistake halfway through and stopped. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she started again. This time she played with more feeling. She imagined herself on that same stage, but instead of polite smiles, she imagined silence. The kind of silence that happens when people are truly listening. The music filled the small house, stronger than ever before. Her mother quietly stepped into the hallway, surprised by the sound. This was different. This was not the gentle beginner tune from earlier. This was bold, emotional, alive. She stood there, listening without interrupting. When the girl finally finished, her chest rose and fell quickly. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never played it that powerfully before. Her mother walked in slowly. "What was that?" she asked softly. The girl looked down. "Just something I've been practicing." Her mother smiled, but there was a new expression in her eyes. Not surprise, not doubt, something closer to pride. "You don't sound like someone who should only play simple tunes," she said quietly. Those words settled deep in her heart. The next day at school, the teacher asked her to run through the simple piece once more. She did. It was flawless as always. "Perfect," he said. "Remember, confidence comes from keeping things manageable." She nodded, but inside, a quiet decision was forming. The event was only a week away. Everyone expected her to walk onto that stage and play the safe melody. They expected something pleasant and forgettable. They did not know about the late nights. They did not know about the hours of practice when no one was watching. They did not know about the stronger music waiting inside her. As she sat at her desk later that day, listening to classmates talk excitedly about the talent show, she felt calm. For the first time, she was not bothered by their doubt. Because while they thought she was preparing to play a simple tune, she was preparing something else entirely. And deep inside, she knew that when the moment came, the stage would not hear something safe. It would hear the truth she had been building in silence. The week before the event moved slowly, yet every day felt heavier than the one before. At school, the excitement around the talent evening kept growing. Posters were taped onto hallway walls. Teachers reminded students to invite their families. The community center shared small updates online. It was becoming a bigger deal than anyone first expected. She walked through the halls quietly, holding her books close to her chest. People were busy talking about costumes, stage lights, and who would sit in the front row. Whenever someone mentioned the piano, a few heads would turn toward her. "Are you ready for your simple tune?" one classmate asked with a playful smile. She smiled back gently. "Yes." The answer was short, calm, no extra explanation. Inside the music room, rehearsals continued. The teacher was focused on keeping everything organized. Each performer had a set time, No surprises were allowed. The schedule was printed and taped near the door. Her name appeared in the middle of the list, right between a high-energy dance group and the school choir. A soft piano piece will balance the mood, the teacher said one afternoon while reviewing the lineup. We don't want the audience to feel overwhelmed. She understood what he meant. He was thinking about flow, not about her. During rehearsal, she played the assigned piece again. Her fingers moved perfectly across the keys. She even added a small touch of emotion, just enough to make it pleasant. Good, the teacher said. Keep it exactly like that. No need to add anything extra. No need to add anything extra. Those words followed her home that day. When she reached her house, she dropped her bag near the sofa and went straight to the piano. She did not turn on the main lights. Only the small lamp beside the piano glowed softly. It had become her quiet place, almost like a secret corner of the world. She played the simple tune once. It sounded neat and controlled. She could play it with her eyes closed now. Then she removed the sheet music and placed her other notebook on the stand. Her heart beat faster, not because the piece was difficult anymore, but because of what it meant. The music she had been practicing in secret was not just complicated, carried feeling. It had quiet moments that felt like whispers and powerful sections that felt like storms. She started slowly. The first notes were soft, careful. Then the melody began to grow. Her left hand pressed deeper into the lower keys, creating a strong bass. Her right hand moved freely, almost like it was telling a story without words. Halfway through, she imagined the stage again. She pictured the audience talking casually, not expecting much. She imagined the teacher sitting in the second row, confident that she would deliver something simple. Her fingers pressed harder. She did not want to embarrass anyone. She did not want to prove someone wrong in a dramatic way, but she wanted to be honest with herself. After she finished, she stayed seated, staring at the keys. Her reflection looked back at her from the piano's glossy surface. For the first time, she did not look unsure. She looked focused. The next day at school, something unexpected happened. A well-known pianist from a nearby town came to observe the rehearsal. He had agreed to attend the talent evening as a guest. People respected him. Some even called him one of the best musicians in the area. The music teacher introduced him proudly. Students gathered around, whispering excitedly. When it was her turn to rehearse, she felt a small wave of nervousness. Not fear, just awareness. This was someone who understood music deeply. She sat at the piano and began the simple tune. The room was quiet. The guest pianist stood near the back with his arms crossed, listening carefully. She finished without mistakes. The guest nodded slightly. Clean, he said. Very clean. She waited. But don't try to do more than this, he added calmly. At events like these, simple is safer. People appreciate what they understand. Safer again. She lowered her eyes respectfully. Yes. He moved on to observe the next performer. But his words stayed in her mind longer than she expected. Not because they were harsh. They were not. They were practical. Experienced. Still, something inside her disagreed. That evening, she practiced even longer than usual. The secret piece flowed more naturally now. She no longer struggled with the hardest sections. Her fingers seemed to remember exactly where to go. At one point, she stopped playing and simply sat there, listening to the silence in the room. What was she afraid of? Was she afraid of making a mistake? Of surprising people too much? Of disappointing the teacher who believed in keeping things manageable? Or was she afraid of being seen fully for the first time? The thought felt bigger than she expected. The following days passed in a similar pattern. At school, she remained the quiet student preparing a simple performance. At home, she was someone else entirely. A musician shaping something powerful in the quiet hours. Her mother noticed the change. There was a new energy in the house at night. Not loud but strong. Focused. You've been practicing a lot, her mother said one evening while bringing her a cup of tea. She nodded. I want it to be right. Her mother studied her face for a moment. Right for who? The question surprised her. She did not answer immediately. Later that night, lying in bed, she thought about it again. Right for who? If she played the simple tune, everyone would be satisfied. The teacher would smile. The guest pianist would nod politely. The audience would clap kindly. It would be safe. But if she played the piece she truly loved, there would be risk. It was longer. It was more intense. It would change the mood of the room completely, and people might not expect that from her. 2 days before the event, there was a final full rehearsal at the community center. The lights were tested. The microphones were adjusted. Each performer ran through their act once. When her turn came, she walked to the piano and played the simple tune again. After she finished, the organizer approached her. "Perfect timing," he said. "Exactly 3 minutes. That helps a lot." She nodded politely. As she stepped off the stage, she looked back at the piano. Under the soft stage lights, it looked different from the one at home. Larger, more powerful. She imagined what her other piece would sound like on this instrument. The thought sent a small shiver down her spine. On the night before the event, she practiced alone once more. This time, she did not stop even when she made a tiny mistake. She kept going, letting the music carry her forward. When she reached the final note, she let it ring longer than usual. Her heart was steady. She closed the piano lid gently and stood up. Instead of feeling nervous, she felt calm. Not because she knew exactly what would happen, but because she had made peace with herself. The event was no longer just about a school performance. It was about whether she would hide behind something safe or step into something real. As she prepared for bed, she folded the simple sheet music neatly and placed it inside her bag. Then she placed her other notebook on top of it. The next day would decide which one she would open on stage. And for the first time, she was not thinking about what others expected. She was thinking about the sound she wanted the world to hear. The evening of the event arrived with a strange mix of excitement and quiet pressure. The town felt more alive than usual. Cars filled the parking lot of the community center. Soft lights glowed through the windows. Inside, people moved from place to place, adjusting chairs, testing microphones, and checking the program list one last time. She stood near the entrance for a moment before walking in. She held her bag close to her side. Inside it were 2 pieces of music. One everyone expected. One no one knew about. The air inside the hall felt warm. Families filled the seats slowly. Parents waved at their children on stage. Teachers greeted each other with polite smiles. The sound of conversation blended into a steady hum. Backstage, performers gathered in a small waiting area. Some were stretching. Others were whispering lyrics to themselves. The drum player tapped lightly on his knees. The dance group adjusted their costumes in front of a mirror. She sat quietly in a chair near the wall. Her hands rested on her lap. She could feel her heartbeat, but it was not wild. It was steady, almost calm. The music teacher walked over to her. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," she replied softly. "Remember," he said gently, "just play the piece we practiced. Don't rush. Let it flow naturally." She nodded. He gave her a small, encouraging smile before moving on to check on the next performer. A few minutes later, the program began. The host stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone warmly. The audience clapped with enthusiasm. The first performance started, followed by another. Laughter filled the room during a funny skit. The dance group received loud cheers. The drum performance shook the hall with energy. She listened carefully to every sound. With each act, the audience grew more engaged. They clapped louder. They leaned forward in their seats. The atmosphere was building. Then her name was announced. For a second, everything felt quiet in her mind. Even though the audience was clapping politely, she stood up slowly. Her legs felt light, almost weightless, as she walked toward the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces in the crowd clearly. But she could sense them. Rows of people, watching, waiting. She reached the piano and adjusted the bench carefully. The microphone was placed just above the strings to catch the sound. The piano looked larger than it had during rehearsal. More powerful. She placed her bag on the floor beside her. For a moment, She simply sat there, breathing in and out slowly. The host's voice echoed in her mind. She will be playing a simple piano tune. Simple. She opened her bag. Her fingers brushed against the folded sheet everyone expected her to use. Then they touched the notebook underneath. Her heart beat once, strong and clear. She pulled out the simple sheet music and placed it on the stand. The audience shifted slightly in their seats, ready for something calm after the energetic performances. She placed her hands on the keys. The first notes flowed gently into the room. Soft, controlled, familiar. The melody moved exactly as it had during rehearsal. Smooth and light. Some audience members relaxed back into their chairs. A few parents smiled warmly. The music teacher sat in the second row, nodding slightly satisfied. She played the first section perfectly. Her hands did not shake. Her posture was straight. Every note landed where it should. But as she reached the middle of the piece, something inside her stirred. It was not sudden panic. It was not fear. It was clarity. She heard the simple melody echo in the hall. It sounded pleasant, just as everyone expected. But it did not sound like her. Her fingers slowed for a brief second, almost too small for anyone to notice. Then, instead of continuing to the next predictable line, her left hand shifted. The change was subtle at first. A slightly deeper note. A softer pause. The audience might have thought it was just a small variation. But then her right hand moved differently. The melody began to grow. It still carried the softness of the original tune, but something new entered it. Emotion. Weight. Intention. The simple tune slowly transformed into something richer. The rhythm deepened. The notes layered over each other. In the second row, the music teacher straightened in his seat. This was not exactly how they had practiced it. The guest pianist, sitting near the aisle, leaned forward slightly. On stage, she no longer looked like someone carefully following a printed page. Her eyes were no longer focused on the sheet music. They were focused somewhere deeper, somewhere inside. Her hands moved with growing confidence. The melody climbed higher, then dipped low with strength. The soft tune that had started the performance became a doorway into something far more powerful. The room grew quiet. Not polite quiet, real quiet. The kind of silence that happens when people are unsure what is coming next but cannot look away. Her fingers moved faster now, but not out of control. Each note felt deliberate. Each shift in tempo felt meaningful. The sound filled the hall completely. It no longer felt like background music between performances. It felt like the main moment. In the audience, whispers stopped. Phones that had been loosely held were now raised more carefully. Eyes widened. She pressed into a strong chord that echoed deeply, then allowed a soft passage to follow, like a breath after a storm. Her heart was racing now, but her hands were steady. She was not thinking about the teacher. She was not thinking about the guest pianist. She was not thinking about whether this was safe. She was thinking about the story in the music. As the piece built toward its most intense section, her shoulders relaxed instead of tightening. She trusted her hands. She trusted the hours of practice in the quiet of her living room. The final section approached. It was the hardest part. Fast notes, quick transitions, strong emotion. For a brief second, doubt tried to whisper in her mind. What if you miss a note? But the doubt faded just as quickly. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision. The sound grew fuller, brighter, almost overwhelming. And then, suddenly, everything softened. The powerful notes gave way to a gentle closing melody. A reminder of where she had started, but transformed, matured. She pressed the final key slowly. The note rang out into the hall. She lifted her hands from the piano. Silence. Not awkward silence. Stunned silence. She kept her eyes on the keys for one extra second before looking up. The audience sat frozen. Then someone in the back row began to clap. One pair of hands. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into applause. It was not polite anymore. It was loud, surprised, almost disbelieving. Some people stood up without even realizing they had done so. The music teacher's expression had completely changed. The calm satisfaction from earlier was gone. In its place was wide-eyed realization. The guest pianist did not clap immediately. He simply stared at her for a moment, as if replaying the performance in his mind. Then slowly he began to clap too. She stood up from the bench carefully. Her legs felt slightly weak now, but not from fear. From release. She gave a small bow. The applause continued longer than she expected. As she walked off stage, her heart pounded loudly in her ears. She could not tell if she felt relieved, nervous, or something else entirely. Backstage, the other performers looked at her differently now. Not with doubt. Not with casual smiles. With respect. She sat down quietly in her chair again, breathing slowly. Out in the hall, the energy had shifted. The next performer was being introduced, but the audience was still whispering about what they had just heard. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer trembling. They were steady. For the first time, she understood something clearly. She had not just played a piece of music. She had changed the way the room saw her. And nothing about the evening would feel simple again. The applause did not fade quickly. Even after she walked off the stage, the sound followed her behind the curtain. It felt unreal, like she was hearing it from far away. Her ears were warm. Her hands were still slightly cold. She stood near the backstage wall, trying to breathe normally. The next performer was already being introduced, but the audience was slower to settle down this time. There was movement in the seats. People were leaning toward one another, whispering. Some were still clapping softly even as the lights shifted for the next act. She sat down in the same chair she had been in before her performance. Felt different now. Smaller somehow. Or maybe she felt bigger inside. A girl from the dance group leaned toward her. "I didn't know you could play like that," she said quietly, not in a jealous way, but in pure surprise. She gave a small smile. "I've been practicing." "That wasn't the simple tune," the girl added gently. She shook her head. No, there was no need to explain more. Across the backstage area, the music teacher stood still for a moment, watching her. His expression was not angry. It was thoughtful, almost confused. He walked toward her slowly. "You changed it," he said, keeping his voice low so others wouldn't hear clearly. "Yes," she replied, meeting his eyes. There was a pause between them. Not tense, just heavy with meaning. "That was not what we rehearsed," he continued. "I know." He studied her face. Perhaps he expected nervousness or apology. Instead, he saw calm. After a few seconds, he nodded slightly. "It was unexpected." She waited. "And very well played," he added. Those words meant more to her than the loud applause. They were not dramatic. They were honest. "Thank you," she said softly. He gave her one last look, then turned back toward the stage area, still processing what had just happened. Out in the audience, the program continued, but something had shifted. The energy felt different now. The next performers did well, but the room carried a quiet buzz that had not been there before. In the front rows, parents were replaying the moment in their minds. A few had recorded parts of it on their phones. The guest pianist sat with his hands folded, staring ahead, not fully focused on the stage anymore. When the final act ended and the host returned to thank everyone, the applause was warm and steady. Performers were invited back on stage for a group acknowledgement. She walked out with the others, standing in a line under the bright lights. As she looked at the audience again, she noticed something new. People were looking at her differently. Not as the quiet girl who played a safe piece. Not as background. They were looking at her as someone they had just discovered. The event ended with cheerful conversations filling the hall. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Families gathered near the stage to congratulate their children. Laughter echoed through the space. She stepped down from the stage carefully. Before she could reach the backstage door, someone called out to her. It was the guest pianist. He approached slowly, his expression serious but not cold. "You surprised me," he said. She stood still, unsure of what would follow. "I told you to keep it simple," he continued. "I believed that was best." She nodded respectfully. He let out a small breath. "But what you played was not reckless. It was controlled, thoughtful. You were ready for it. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. I've been practicing it for a long time. I can tell, he said. You did not rush. You understood the piece. There was a moment of silence between them. Why didn't you show this during rehearsal? He asked. She thought carefully before answering. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to. The honesty in her words seemed to affect him. His face softened slightly. Music is not only about following instructions, he said quietly. It is also about knowing when you are ready to step forward. She nodded again. Keep working, he added. Not for applause, not for approval, but for the music itself. I will, she replied. He gave a final nod and walked away. She stood there for a moment, letting his words settle inside her. Across the room, her mother was waiting near the exit. When their eyes met, there was no need for many words. Her mother opened her arms, and she stepped into a warm hug. You were brave, her mother whispered. The word brave echoed in her mind. She had not felt brave on stage. She had felt honest. As they walked toward the parking lot, cool night air greeted them. The sky above was dark and clear. Streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. Inside the car, everything was quiet for a few minutes. Were you scared? Her mother finally asked. A little, she admitted, but not the way I thought I would be. What do you mean? I was more scared of not playing it, she said slowly. That felt worse. Her mother smiled softly. Then you made the right choice. At home, she placed her bag down near the piano again. The room looked the same as it always had. The old upright piano stood quietly in its corner. But something inside her had changed. She walked over and lifted the lid once more. She did not need to practice now. She did not need to prove anything. Still, she pressed a few keys gently. The sound felt familiar, comforting. Earlier that week, she had been divided between two versions of herself. The safe one and the honest one. Tonight, those two had become one. The next morning at school, the atmosphere felt different. As she entered the hallway, conversations slowed slightly. Not in a dramatic way, but enough for her to notice. Someone smiled at her as she passed. Another student said, "That was amazing last night." She thanked them quietly. In the music room, the teacher greeted her with a small nod. There was no lecture, no criticism. Instead, he asked, "Will you play that piece again for the class sometime?" She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she said. During lunch, she sat at her usual table. But now a few more students joined her. They asked how long she had been practicing, where she learned it, why she never showed it before. She answered simply, "I wasn't sure anyone wanted to hear it." One of them shook their head. "We did. We just didn't know." That sentence stayed with her. People do not always know what you carry inside. Sometimes they only see what you show them. Later that afternoon, when she returned home, she did not rush to the piano immediately. Instead, she sat quietly by the window, thinking. The performance had lasted only minutes, but its impact felt larger than time. She had not won a trophy. There were no judges or prizes, but she had gained something deeper. Confidence that did not come from praise, came from alignment, from choosing the music that felt true. As the sun began to set, she finally walked to the piano again. She opened her notebook and placed it on the stand. This time there was no secrecy. She began to play, not imagining an audience, not imagining applause, just playing. The notes filled the room gently, not simple, not for approval, just honest. And for the first time, she understood that the real change had not happened in the hall full of people. It had happened inside her the moment she decided not to hide. The days after the performance felt strangely bright. Nothing in the town had physically changed. The same shops opened in the morning. The same school bell rang at the same time. The same buses passed through the streets. But for her, everything carried a different feeling. When she walked into school on Monday, she noticed the looks first. Not dramatic stares, not whispers filled with mockery like before. These were softer, curious, respectful. A few students who had never spoken to her before nodded and smiled. One stopped her near the lockers and said, "I watched the video again last night. My parents couldn't believe it." She blinked. "Video? Yeah, someone posted it. It's been shared a lot." Her heart skipped. She had not thought about recordings. She had been so focused on the moment that she forgot how easily things could travel beyond the room. During lunch break, someone showed her a short clip on their phone. The screen was small, but the sound was clear. She saw herself sitting at the piano, calm, focused. She watched the moment when the music shifted, when the simple tune became something powerful. It felt strange to see herself like that. Strong, certain. "I didn't know you could do that," the students said again, shaking their head in disbelief. She smiled softly. "I didn't know either." That answer surprised even her. But it was true. She had practiced the piece many times, but performing it in front of everyone had revealed something new. Later that day, the music teacher called her aside after class. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against his desk. "I may have underestimated how ready you were." She stood quietly, listening. "I focus a lot on structure and safety," he continued. "Sometimes I forget that growth doesn't always look safe." There was no anger in his voice, only honesty. "You worked very hard," he added. "I can see that now." "Thank you," she replied. He paused for a moment. "There is a regional youth music gathering next month. It's not a competition exactly, but it's more formal than our school event. Would you like to participate?" Her chest tightened slightly. Another stage, another audience. But this time the idea did not feel frightening. "Yes," she said carefully. "I would." "Then start preparing properly," he said with a small smile. "If you're going to step forward fully." As she left the classroom, she felt a quiet excitement building inside her. At home that evening, she told her mother about the invitation. Her mother listened with calm pride, as always. "You see," her mother said gently, "one honest moment can open many doors." She nodded. That night, she sat at the piano again. But something was different now. Before, she had practiced in secret, almost as if protecting something fragile. Now she felt allowed. She played the same piece again, but she noticed small details she could improve. A transition that could be smoother. A section that needed more control. She wasn't satisfied just because people had clapped. She wanted to grow. The applause from the event had faded, but the desire to improve had not. Over the next week, small changes continued around her. During music class, the teacher asked her to demonstrate techniques for other students. She felt shy at first, but she explained slowly and clearly. She showed them how to move their wrists lightly, how to press keys without tension. Some listened with genuine interest. Others watched with quiet surprise. The girl who once blended into the background was now standing at the front of the room. One afternoon, the guest pianist returned to the school for a short workshop. Students gathered eagerly in the music room. He spoke about discipline, about listening deeply to sound, about respecting the silence between notes. When the session ended, he asked if anyone wanted to play something. There was a short pause. Then he looked at her. "Would you?" he asked. The room turned toward her again. She stood slowly and walked to the piano. This time there was no simple sheet music. No expectations about keeping things small. She began to play. The room fell quiet just like it had at the event. But this silence felt different. Felt intentional. When she finished, the guest pianist nodded thoughtfully. "You see," he said to the room, "this is what happens when someone practices not just with their hands, but with their heart." She felt her face grow warm, but she did not look away. After the workshop, he spoke to her privately. "You handled the attention well," he said. "That's important." "I'm still getting used to it," she admitted. "Attention can disappear as quickly as it arrives," he said calmly. "What matters is whether you continue when no one is watching." His words reminded her of the quiet nights before the event. The hours when only the small lamp and the piano kept her company. "I will," she said. Back at home, life remained simple. There were still dishes to wash, homework to finish, floors to sweep. The world had not turned her into someone else, and she was grateful for that. One evening, as she practiced for the upcoming regional gathering, she paused mid-piece. She realized something important. The night of the performance had not been about proving anyone wrong. It had not been about shocking the audience. It had been about trusting herself. The applause had been loud. The reactions had been strong. But the real victory had been quieter. It had been the moment she chose not to hide. A few days later, she walked past the community center again. The doors were closed. The lights were off. It looked ordinary. If someone had walked by, they would never guess what had happened inside those walls. But she knew. She stopped for a second, looking at the building. Then she smiled softly and continued walking, because she understood something now that she hadn't before. Being underestimated is not always a weakness. Sometimes it is space. Space to grow quietly. Space to prepare. Space to surprise even yourself. And as she walked home under the fading evening sky, she did not feel like the girl who had once accepted a simple tune without question. She felt like someone who had found her own sound. Not loud, not reckless, just true. The regional youth music gathering arrived faster than she expected. The weeks between the school event and this new stage had been full of practice, schoolwork, and quiet reflection. Life had continued as normal on the outside, but inside her, something steady had grown. This time, she was not preparing in secret. Her music teacher helped her choose the piece carefully. It was challenging but not beyond her reach. It required control, patience, and emotion. He no longer told her to keep it simple. Instead, he asked her questions. What do you feel in this part? Why does this section slow down? What story are you telling here? Those questions changed the way she practiced. She no longer focused only on hitting the right notes. She focused on meaning. The gathering was held in a larger hall in a nearby city. When she walked inside for the first rehearsal, she felt the difference immediately. The ceiling was higher. The stage lights were brighter. The piano at the center looked polished and grand. Other young musicians were there too. Some looked confident. Some looked nervous. A few had clearly been performing for years. For a moment, doubt tried to return. Am I ready for this? But she remembered the quiet nights in her living room. She remembered the moment she chose honesty over safety. That memory felt stronger than fear. When it was her turn to rehearse, she sat at the grand piano and placed her hands on the keys. The instrument felt different from the old upright at home. The keys were smoother. The sound was fuller. She played slowly at first, adjusting to the feel. Then she let the music flow. The empty hall carried her sound beautifully. Even during rehearsal, she felt connected to the piece. Later that evening, she sat alone for a few minutes in the back row of the hall, watching other performers practice. Each one had their own style, their own strengths. She realized something important then. She was no longer trying to shock anyone. She was trying to grow. The day of the performance arrived with clear skies and cool air. She dressed simply but neatly. Her mother adjusted a small detail on her sleeve before they left the house. Remember, her mother said gently, you already proved something important. She nodded. To myself. Her mother smiled. At the venue, the atmosphere felt serious but supportive. Families filled the seats quietly. Teachers and organizers moved around with calm focus. There was no loud cheering like at the school event. It was respectful, attentive. Backstage, she closed her eyes for a moment and breathed slowly. She could hear faint music from the stage as another performer finished their piece. Her name was called. She walked forward with steady steps. The stage lights warmed her face as she approached the piano. The audience looked like a soft blur beyond the brightness. She adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys. This time, there was no simple tune at the beginning. No hidden shift. From the very first note, she played exactly what she intended. The melody unfolded naturally. Some sections were delicate and quiet. Others were strong and confident. She did not rush. She did not hold back. She felt every note. In the middle of the piece, there was a moment of silence written into the music. A pause. In that pause, she did not feel fear. She felt presence. She continued, letting the final section rise and fall like a deep breath. When she reached the last note, she allowed it to fade completely before lifting her hands. The hall remained quiet for one heartbeat. Then applause began. It was not explosive like before. It was steady, respectful, appreciative, and somehow it meant just as much. She stood and bowed gently. As she walked off stage, she did not feel the overwhelming rush she had felt during the first event. Instead, she felt grounded. She had not surprised anyone this time. She had simply shown who she was. After the program ended, several people approached her. A music instructor from another school complimented her control. An elderly woman told her the piece made her emotional. A young student said it inspired them to practice more seriously. Each comment felt warm, but none of them defined her. Later, while sitting quietly with her mother in the audience as the final awards and acknowledgments were announced, she realized something surprising. Whether her name was called for special recognition or not no longer mattered as much as it once might have. She had already gained what she needed. When the event ended and they stepped outside into the evening air, her mother looked at her carefully. "You seemed calm," her mother said. "I was," she replied. "Not nervous. A little. But it felt different. It felt like I belonged there." They walked slowly toward the car. On the drive home, she looked out the window at the passing lights. She thought about the girl who had once accepted a simple tune without question. The girl who had practiced in silence, unsure if anyone wanted to hear more. She smiled softly. That girl still existed. But now she understood something deeper. Being told to play a simple tune was not an insult. It was a starting point. People often see only what is visible. They make decisions based on what they know. It is not always meant to limit you. Sometimes it is just a reflection of what you have not shown yet. When they reached home, she went straight to the piano. The familiar upright waited quietly in its corner. She sat down and played a few soft notes. Not for practice, not for an audience, just because she loved the sound. The room filled with gentle music. There were no cameras, no applause, no expectations, and yet it felt complete. Over the next months, she continued to grow. She performed occasionally. She studied more seriously. She listened carefully to feedback but trusted her own instincts too. People in town still remembered the night she transformed a simple tune into something powerful. It became part of local stories. Parents mentioned it to their children. Teachers referred to it as an example of quiet dedication. But she did not hold onto that moment as her greatest achievement. She held onto the decision behind it. The decision not to hide. Years later, when she looked back at that first school event, she did not remember the whispers or the doubt as painful. She remembered the shift in the music. The second when her fingers chose honesty. And she understood that the real masterpiece was not just the piece she played. It was the courage to let it be heard. From that night forward, whenever someone told her to keep things simple, she smiled. Because she knew simplicity and depth are not opposites. They are choices, and she had learned how to choose.